When I was 10 years old, my poor dad kept asking, "Hey, Dad, when am I going to learn about money?" He says, "We don't teach school about money."
In this episode, we sat down with Robert Kiyosaki. His book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, has sold 43 million copies and remains the top title in personal finance.
I said, "Well, how did I get rich?" Well, he says, "Well, if you stay in school, get your PhD.
Get your PhD.
I said, "Dad, you have a PhD. We're poor." He says, "Well, then you better talk to your best friend's father." That was Rich Dad.
From reading the Communist Manifesto to becoming an advocate for capitalist financial education, Kiyosaki warns about the danger of hyperinflation and central bank control.
Every time you print money, the gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider and wider. What Marx wanted was this gap between rich and poor.
He also shares 3 lessons to build wealth that he believes can change your life and help you become truly self-sufficient.
Your poor dad, Marxist, good man. He says we should give people money. Well, that's honorable. But why not teach them? Why not teach people to fish versus how to steal fish?
Let's say you're a young person today and you don't have a lot of money. What's your next step? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Robert Kiyosaki, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's my honor. My honor. I mean, I love what the Epoch Times is doing. I'm so honored to be part of your program. So let's go back real quickly. When I was 18 years old, I read this book here, the Communist Manifesto. And I was living in Hawaii, and I went to school in New York. I went to military school. And my economics teacher says, "You have to read this book." And I went, "Why?" He says, "Because you must know your enemy." And my economics teacher was I went to Kings Point. He went to West Point, Academy graduates. And he says, and he flew the B-17 in World War II, got shot down, captured, all this stuff. He says, "These guys are not stopping." And I went, "Holy mackerel." And then, so I wrote this book here, the Capitalist Manifesto, against this here. Because our school system, as you know, Marx was an academic type, pointy-head guy. And our school systems are teaching Marxism. And this here is I just happened to find this. This is my hat from Vietnam. I was a Marine Corps first lieutenant. That was we're gunship drivers. Our call sign was Scarface. And I was at the battle in 1971. I was at the Battle of Quang Tri when the North Vietnamese busted through. And I was going, so we're gunship pilots going in. We couldn't stop them. And these communists were coming through. I was going, "Oh my God, what's happening here?" We lost so many men that day. The worst thing was the North Vietnamese were running. They carry the AK-47, and they run like this. I was a U.S. Marine, and they were defending them. And the South Vietnamese turned and ran. Jan, when I saw the South Vietnamese turn and run, one of the saddest days of my life. And ever since then, I've been fighting communism by teaching capitalism.
Well, you could imagine I was surprised when you came in the door with the Communist Manifesto.
It's worth reading. The average American has no idea. And that's the problem. I have the good fortune or bad fortune to be in the right place at the wrong time. Like the Battle of Quang Tri, when the North Vietnamese broke through.
Well, and thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you. It's worth fighting. Our freedom is worth fighting for. So when they broke through, I went, "What am I seeing here?" When I was 18 or 19 years old, I held up a coin, 1965. A silver dollar was no longer silver, it was copper. And what they were doing, the U.S. government, they were violating Gresham's law. And what Gresham's law says, when bad money enters a system, good money goes into hiding. And I went, what the heck's going on here? So in 1965, as an 18-year-old kid, I go to school, at a military school. I read this book, and I see our currency, our dollars going down. We used to be a silver certificate. Now we're a Federal Reserve note. And as most people know, there's a big movement on to end the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank, because it's not federal, it's not reserve, it's not a bank. It's a Marxist organization. It's a central bank. And in 1912 or 1913, when the Fed came to America, it was the end of America. And our freedom is being stolen via our money. You said you had to run from your parents. Was it you or your parents ran from Poland?
My parents actually left Poland in 70. Yeah, 1970.
People haven't seen communism. And the problem is our school system, the communists are our professors. We got attacked by 39 professors at Arizona State University. I think the fourth or fifth largest university in America. I was teaching capitalism. And they said, stop. So I respect the Epoch Times for your fight against communism, Marxism, because I'm still in the fight. I just fight as an author, though. And I have a board game and all this. I teach capitalism. But our schools are taught by Marxists.
Did you know that only 26% of young people trust the media these days? You wouldn't see this happening back in the old days. Journalism was just that, journalism. You would just focus on getting the facts, and you'd get prominent perspectives from different voices, all to try to get a clear overall picture of what was going on. What's right or wrong, that's for the reader to decide. That's for you to decide. But now journalism has almost become a kind of a team sport. They pick a side and they stick to it. And that's just how they do their business. But if you're tired of cross-checking each and every fact, I want to invite you to try the Epoch Times. Basically, for pennies a day, you're supporting some of the best independent journalism in the world. So please hit the link below and subscribe to the Epoch Times. Read the news that the White House is reading every day. Before we jump into dealing with our fraught economy, how to actually build wealth as a young person today, all these types of questions. You also told me that you were actually in Zimbabwe. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Zimbabwe, because I was a student of money. I'm a politically incorrect hunter. So I was out in Zimbabwe, I think in 2000, 2002. And I was there for the collapse of Zimbabwe because they printed too much money. Remember, they had like $25 trillion bill, couldn't buy you an egg. They kept printing money. I went, holy mackerel. And Zimbabwe collapsed. America is doing the same thing. We're now $38 trillion in debt and climbing because of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is Marxist. So I'm in Zimbabwe watching this collapse. I thought I was back in Vietnam again. I was already back from Vietnam. I'm in a truck. I'm a hunter. And when the economy collapsed in Zimbabwe, they called them war vets. These young black guys come up with AK-47s. I went, and I put the gun right here. They took everything. They took the farm. They took it all. They called it reparations. So I just went back this year, 2025, to teach my cash flow game. And the Zimbabwe Economic Council asked me to teach money to Zimbabwe through the cash flow game, And it was such an honor to go back there. So I'm writing a new book called I Kept My Promise. I said, I'll return, I'll come back, and I'll teach. But I've seen too much. Zimbabwe was such a wake-up call. Quang Tri was such a wake-up call. 18, going to military school, reading this book, and then holding up a coin at 18 going, why is our money, why is our silver coins, why are they copper now? And they were stealing our wealth via our money. And that's what happens when central banks take over.
Well, I think we're not quite there yet, not this sort of hyperinflation. I remember seeing that. It was just something, it was kind of unimaginable, the level at which it was growing, even as it, when a lot younger, I saw that as being hugely problematic. But, how do we deal with $38 trillion in debt?
Can't. So that's why, one of the questions we're talking about before this program started, that's why I own gold mines and I own silver coins, because they can't print gold and they can't print silver. And I own a lot of Bitcoin, Ethereum. I want to get away from my government as much as I can. I hate to say this, but the U.S. government's corrupt. And, my friend here is Donald Trump. And we've written 2 books together. And then he became president. We're supposed to write the 3rd book. He goes, "Hey, Robert, I can't write the 3rd book. I'm going to run for president." I said, "Good luck." Just amazing that he keeps going. But we got together to teach money, teach financial education. But our school systems stop us. So it's in academics. Exactly, what Marx believed was the intellectuals should run the world. People like my poor dad, PhDs. They think they're superior to all of us. Just because they went to school and got a PhD, they think they're smarter than you and me.
As we were preparing for this interview, one of my producers mentioned to me that she first heard about you when her father told her, "I'm the poor dad, actually, and you should learn how to, you should learn the rich dad principles." But things have changed since you wrote that book.
Gotten worse.
Yeah. So where are we at today? What is the situation for young people or for their parents or grandparents who want to, help them basically be successful today?
Well, the question I start with is, what does school teach you about money? Why not? It's because our school system's Marxist. They're like my poor dad. They're good people. They just don't know. And their whole value system is, I'm a straight A student. I got my PhD, or I'm a doctor, I'm an accountant, I'm an attorney. I'm smart, but they don't know anything about money. And one of the things that this guy talked about here was income tax. He said, Marx said taxes. Taxes are essential for the spread of communism. Now think about this. America was founded as a tax-free nation. 1773 was a thing called the Boston Tea Party. America was founded as a tax revolt against Mother England. And so 1913, I think, my old man now, when the Fed came in, the next thing was formed was the 16th Amendment, which allowed taxes to come back into America. So what's happening, as you can see it, the gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider and wider. And every time you print money, fake money, fiat money, I get richer, rich get richer, poor middle class get poorer, because inflation sends my price. I have oil wells because you can't print oil. So I have oil wells. The price of oil goes up. The price of chickens go up. Food goes up. Real estate goes up. But when mom and pop, Mr. and Mrs. Middle Class go to the supermarket, they go, I can't afford to eat anymore. So I think what Marx wanted was this gap between rich and poor. In fact, that was his plan. As if you studied Marx, he says he wanted equality. He says the way you destroy anybody is you pull the poor up, but you pull the rich down. And that's what Marx was trying to do. And so I see all that going on right now. And today, I've never seen such homelessness spreading all across the world, but also America. And I've seen homelessness in Africa and things like this. But we're in Phoenix, Arizona right now. We have whole zones full of homeless people because they can't afford real estate. their dollar doesn't pay it much. So that's why I started when I saw in Vietnam when the North Vietnamese punched through the line. Again, this is my squadron here, and very proud to be U.S. Marine and gunship pilot, and they kept coming. And then they were running like this with their AKs this way. And a few years later, I'm in Zimbabwe, I'm getting the same thing going. It's repeating. It's just repeating.
And just to clarify, with the Marx's intention, the way I understand it, what you said was very interesting, right? What I understand it is he wanted to increase that division, right, between the rich and the poor, so there would be struggle. Did I get that right?
He wanted to bring the poor up and the rich down. His thing was the take away the means of. He wanted to control the means of production.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the abolition of private property is what Marx wanted. And this guy, what's his name? I forget his name. Someday you'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
But the situation that you described is one where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, so they're separating from each other, not coming together. Can you clarify that?
Well, when you print money, I get richer because I own real estate, I own oil wells, I own cattle. Food gets up in price. And then, but the poor and middle class have to pay for it. So my apartment houses go up, but the poor and middle class go homeless. And that's the seeds of communism. That's the seed of revolt. That was the Russian Revolution, Lenin and Stalin. Mm-hmm. It's happening all again. And the way this was so stupid that only an intellectual from a U.S. university or a school would believe this crap. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. It was a good idea. But the only way they could enforce this was by force. So you look at what happened in China. They had to use force to get the people to comply with this stupid man's with his ideologues' ideas. In Russia, they had to use force to get them to comply. So that's the Falun Gong and all this stuff. They suppress people because Marx wanted everybody to be equal. Pull the rich down, pull the poor up. And people actually believed that idea. But his primary idea was intellectuals should tell the world how to live. Those are called academics, the liberal left.
And to achieve that revolution, he wanted to destabilize society.
Well, you destabilize it by taking the currency. You make the currency fake, and that's what happened when the Federal Reserve Bank came in 1913, I think. At the same time, the 16th Amendment was passed, which was taxes. Mm-hmm. And America was founded as a tax-free nation. 1773. It wasn't founded in 1776. It was founded in 1773, the Boston Tea Party. And now everybody says, well, you have to pay your taxes. You have to pay your taxes. I'm a capitalist. I pay zero taxes legally. I fight like a dog. I refuse to play that game because what those taxes are used for is to create wars. That's how we finance our wars. It's tragic what's happening. It's absolutely tragic. And I fought in war. I didn't like doing it. But I realized Marx was like my poor dad, head of the labor union. And my poor dad, what Marx says was, workers of the world unite. So I go home to my high school. My poor dad's head of the teachers union. Workers of the world unite. That sounds familiar. Today, the NEA, National Education Association, the National Extortion Association, is the most powerful labor union in America. And they control our government because this is what talks here. We've got to fight back. So that's why when I heard that the Epoch Times, you guys were coming to interview me, I said, what an honor, because I've been in the same battle you've been battling. I fight these guys here. And that's why I wrote this book here. And that's why my friend here, Donald Trump, and I fight together for financial education.
So, what is the best financial advice right now, given our current reality, for the typical young person who, many of whom are wondering what their future is going to look like? They're wondering, could I even afford a house? How do I get into getting assets like Robert Kiyosaki has suggested in his books, if they're familiar with Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Where do we start with providing that advice and education?
May I give you a long answer to a short question?
Please.
In 1974, I was getting out of the Marine Corps, and government passed this thing called ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act. I said, what's that mean? Well, anytime the government says income security, it's fake. It's part of the 401k and the IRA. That shift in 1974 was that workers shifted from a defined benefit pension plan, a DB pension plan, to a defined DC pension plan. So a defined benefit was like if today I work for the Ford Motor Company, I'd have a defined benefit plan. My retirement was guaranteed. The 401k or ERISA put in place a defined contribution pension plan. That means if there was nothing there, you have no retirement. So I just feel horrible. My generation of boomers, they're going to have the rug pulled out from underneath of them, because when this market comes down, which it is coming down now, they have no retirement because everything is put in 401ks, ETFs, IRAs, all that crap, bonds. When my financial planner friends say bonds are safe, that is the biggest lie I've ever heard. Bonds aren't safe. China and Japan are dumping U.S. bonds right now. What about gold? What about silver? What about oil? What about cattle? What about real estate? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So because I read this book here, 1965, I was 18 years old, I said, I better start thinking differently. But my rich dad, which is why I wrote this book here, agreed wholeheartedly with this book. He says, your poor dad, Marxist, good man. He says, we should give people money. We should take care of them. Well, that's honorable. But why not teach them? That's why I wrote this book here. Why not teach people to fish versus how to steal fish? And that's what the liberal left is doing. They're stealing our welfare, our money.
So where does that leave the typical young person today?
Well, get financial educated. I don't plug my own stuff. I have a board game called Cash Flow.
Well, this is why I've come here to you, right? Like we need good advice for all of us. I mean, I need it, frankly, not just the young people. So how do we educate ourselves? You mentioned one thing very clearly, that you want to have tangible assets that appreciate.
I think you can't print.
Yeah.
So the cash flow board game, the reason I created the cash flow board game, when I was 10 years old, my poor dad kept asking, hey, Dad, when am I going to learn about money? He says, we don't teach school about money. Then I realized he didn't know anything about money. I said, well, how did I get rich? Well, he says, well, if you stay in school, get your PhD. I said, Dad, you have a PhD. We're poor. Do you know what I mean? Most PhDs are poor. He says, well, then you better talk to your best friend's father. And that was Rich Dad. And Rich Dad was a man who had never finished school. He dropped out of school at 13. So I went to see my Rich Dad, and I said, would you teach me about money? He said, get out of here. I said, get out of here. He says, you're wasting my time. I said, I'll do anything. He says, did you work for me for free? So I had to work Rich Dad owned hotels. So I had to go there, pick up cigarette butts and all that, and I worked for free. And I'd sit down and he said, okay, I'll teach you about money. And he'd break out the Monopoly game. And we played Monopoly, 4 greenhouses, red hotel. Guess what? I own greenhouses and red hotels today. I was 10 years old. It was in my brain. I said, that's how I get rich. Now, I'm not saying you have to buy real estate. So I created the cash flow board game because the power of a game is better than a teacher. A game includes 4 intelligences: mental, physical, you gotta move stuff around, emotional, and spiritual. When you lose in a game, you go, oh, but losing is good because you want to fight back. So there's 4 intelligences in the game: mental, emotional, EQ, physical, or spirit, and spiritual. Like you go to a golf course, can I learn how to play golf? Yeah, but you can't use golf clubs. That's what schools are like. Can you imagine this? You've hit the ball 500 yards and it's a hole-in-one. You've hit a hole-in-one every single time. That's academics. That's PhDs. I sat there, you guys live in La La Land. And those La La Land guys are Marxists. They're exactly as Marx said. It's the intellectual should run the world.
Let's say you're a young person today. You've just finished, let's say, high school. You're considering maybe the trades because they're becoming fashionable again. There's this whole big thing against trades for a while. You're considering university, and you don't have a lot of money. Your parents are, poor dad style, right? For whatever reason, maybe just down and out. Maybe they tried. What's your next step?
I'll just tell you what my rich dad told me. I'm kind of at the Marine Corps. Like I said, I'm a pilot. And so my friends were all joining the airlines. And so my poor dad was so happy, go fly for United, fly for American. I went, and then get your PhD. I said, that's it, Dad? He goes, yeah. I went to my rich dad, and he says, how do I get rich? He says, be an entrepreneur. I'm like, so how long did it take you to become a pilot? I said, 2 years. Same thing. You need the skills of an entrepreneur. So I said, what's that? He said, skill number 1 of an entrepreneur, right? You have to sell. And in my family, I went, oh my God, because my poor dad's family, they hated salesmen. They hated salesmen. No, I don't want to sell, please. To my rich dad, please. I can't sell. My mom and dad hate salesmen. They think they're crooks, they're liars, they're scum and all this. So she says, you asked me for my advice. You have to learn how to sell. No. I'm about 27 years old. No, anything but that. He says, Robert, how's your sex life? I said, 0. He says, because you can't sell. I said, okay, I'll learn how to sell. So then next job was to go find a job that paid me to learn how to sell. And so I got down to interviewing with 2 companies finally, IBM and Xerox. And so the only thing I asked them about wasn't the pay. I said, tell me about your sales school. So today you can get that similar sales training in network marketing. You go to a network marketing company like Amway or stuff like this, they have to train you to sell. And they'll coach you. If you fail, they'll coach you. They'll fail to coach you. So I had to learn how to sell. And then so that was number 1. Second was, after I was selling, Rich Dad says, so what's the next thing? He says, you have to learn how to use debt. And in my poor dad's family, debt is it's dangerous. And Rich Dad says, you just came back from Vietnam. The US dollar is debt. Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. This is 1974. So in 71, the dollar is now debt. He says, you've got to learn how to use debt. And as I said before, the more debt they print, the rich get richer, poor middle class get poorer. So this gap between everybody is so wide today. So I went, holy mackerel. So I said, how do I learn how to use debt? He says, take a class on real estate. So I'm searching around and I found one, how to make money, millions in real estate with nothing down. You know, this is TV time before YouTube. And so I signed up for this nothing down course. It was really good. This guy was a real estate investor. And for 3 days, he taught me how to use debt and all this, debt financing. And I said, okay, I did the 3. Now what do I have to do? This was the best advice. He says, most guys will leave this course and do nothing. He says, your job is in the next 100 days is to look at 100 deals. What? He says, you got to get to the real world. So I'm now I come out of this course. For the next day, I go to realtor after realtor after realtor. I said, I want to look at some property I want to buy for nothing down. They all threw me out, But I kept asking. How do I find a piece of real estate I can get? I have no money. And finally, this one guy, I still remember him, he goes, I have the deal for you. So I said, really? But it took, I didn't go 100 times, but I was willing to. Most people quit. So this guy says, I got a deal for you. It's on Maui. I went, wow. Maui's the richest place on, the most expensive island in Hawaii. So I flew over to Maui, and sure enough, it was a beachfront condo on the beach in Maui. It was $18,000. This is 1974. So I broke out my credit card and I put the down payment on it. It was 100% debt, and I made $25 a month. After all expenses, debt, and all this, I was free. But I had to find that deal. Most people are so effing lazy. They go to a financial planner. What you got? They just take what they sell. So to this day, you can ask my assistants, all I'm doing is looking at deals. It's called deal flow. Looking at this deal, this deal, this deal, this deal. And it becomes a habit, if you know what I mean. So you can train yourself to have the skills and the mindset of a rich person, but you have to do the work.
Well, I think that's the key here. You're pointing out something incredibly important. You have to do the work.
Amen. And I've heard that from a lot of young women. They go, you can't find men today. They're all, they want to be TikTok dancers, or they play video games in the basement. And they said, we can't find men. So they can't afford to have kids, buy apartments or rent and all this.
Let me run an idea by you, okay? I have a theory that there's a few things, if you teach a very young kid, right, that will really help them in life. And it's something, here's one example. I'm just going to use one example because this relates to the Communist Manifesto, right? So my background is in biology. I was actually an evolutionary biologist in training, right? And one of the things we never learned, okay, I literally never learned this until my 40s, okay, is where does prosperity come from? Okay, and I think one of the biggest lies that is in the sort of the communist approach to the world is that the pie is fixed. You have a pie, it's a fixed pie, and the rich people take it from the poor people, right? Because that's kind of how it works in nature, right? As a biologist, you kind of learn, well, there's limited resources, and someone gets the resource, someone doesn't get the resource. But with human beings, the pie expands as you get prosperity, right? And you have Adam Smith, he has, division of labor is the cause, there's innovation, there's all these different approaches, but I never learned this, right? And I think it's very easy to convince someone of the communist approach if they don't understand that prosperity is a thing, right? It expands the pie. I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, that's Malthusian economics, allocation of scarce resources. And the reality is we're given a brain, this year and this year, use it. Look at Elon Musk. He's a South African, comes to America, becomes the richest man in the world. He didn't ask for a handout. He got some government grants and all this. But you can create your prosperity by creating. So I wrote this book here. It was turned down by every publisher because they said, you don't know what you're talking about. So I published it anyway. It's sold 48 million copies so far. #1 book in finance today. Now, 48 million, I make $1 a book, so it's a few bucks there. This didn't exist till I wrote it. It came out of here. I mean, it's a true story. It's the same as Donald Trump. He was born a rich man. I wasn't, but we're good friends because we think alike. So, have you seen the picture that Trump's putting a ballroom onto the White House? There's a picture. There's a cartoon. There's a White House with a Trump Tower attached to it. You give him, if you let him do it, he'd probably do it. It comes out of your head. You create it. You create your prosperity.
For someone that does have some wealth, however it's distributed right now, it could be anywhere from all of it's in cash and fiat, as you described it, all the way to, something like it's all in gold right now. What do you would you recommend people should do in this current financial reality in terms of their allocation of that wealth?
Well, my rich dad said that was really interesting. He said, there's a million ways to financial heaven. In other words, find the way it works for you. There's a billion ways to financial hell. And most people are going to financial hell. So rather than being told what to do, like go to a financial planner or get a job and all this stuff, I had to find out what I was interested in. And I like real estate. I really do love real estate. I own probably 1,500 rental properties. I own commercial. I love real estate. Life is what you imagine. Imagination. So there's a billion ways to financial heaven. I love real estate. I don't like stocks. I don't like bonds. I don't like paper. I like something I can see, touch, and feel. I love cars, I love pens. I have watches. I'm a see, touch, and feel guy. So I stay with what I like and what I'm interested in. I just love real estate, and it provides a service. People have a place to sleep. Unfortunately, people are going homeless. Thomas Jefferson warned us, America, about this. He said, if a central bank takes over, people wind up homeless in the lands their fathers built. And today, Jefferson's prophecy is coming true. Homelessness is exploding because every time you print money, two things go up: taxes and inflation.
I love this idea, right? You have to find the thing you love because that's the thing that you can put all your heart into.
Well, what you love is legal, ethical, and moral.
Well, hopefully what you love is all those things. Well, so this has been a fascinating conversation for me. Perhaps a final thought as we finish?
Well, what I love is this is a piece of real estate. If I own this, I take care of it. If you don't love it, you don't take care of it. So I don't like stocks. I don't own any IBM or Xerox or General Motors or Apple. I like real estate. I like oil. I like cattle. I like food. So that's what I invest in. I just really love real estate, and I love debt. Was a guy like Dave Ramsey. He's always saying, live debt free. Well, Dave's a friend of mine, and most people should follow Dave's advice because they don't think about money. So if you're going to be like me, you have to learn how to use debt. And that's where real estate courses come in. They teach you debt to equity ratios and all this stuff. You can have too much debt or not enough debt and all this stuff. So a lot of times I'll take a property, I'll improve its value, I'll borrow out the equity, add more debt to it. And it drives people crazy. They go, it's 100% debt. I said, yes, but it cash flows. So the asset is, because now debt holds its place. That cash I borrow, the equity I borrow out, I buy another piece. And that's my phone. There's a million ways to heaven and a billion ways to hell. Find the way that you like.
And you have to love doing that, I think. If you are going through the debt, if you're going to go the debt route, it's kind of a bit dangerous if you don't love it.
And smart. You have to want to study it, you know what I mean? Because I've lost a lot of money in my time. I made a lot of mistakes. But I'm still playing Monopoly. I'm still a 10-year-old boy going. And if you ever go to Hawaii, Rich Dad started, he goes, I asked Rich Dad, he had no money either. And he said, someday I'll own that hotel. You go to Waikiki Beach today, there's the Hyatt Regency. Rich Dad doesn't own the hotel, he owns the land.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? He knew his game. So it's just a game. If you like stocks, it's a game. That's all it is. It's fun. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But every time you lose, you get smarter.
Well, Robert Kiyosaki, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you very much. Really an honor. I have tremendous respect for what you guys are doing. We're the same battle. We're fighting communism. I fight with financial education.
Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining Robert Kiyosaki and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.